Hello everyone, today I'm here with Dr. Tomohiro Hoshi, who is the head of Stanford Online High School, for a very special article for the CGA Press. Hello. So first, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be speaking with you and share some of my ideas with your fellow CGA students. So as you just introduced me, I'm head of Stanford Online High School. I've been there for, I think, almost at this point, 14 years. As you might know, Stanford Online High School is an independent school in the United States for grades 7 through 12. We've got about 900 students at this point from about, probably like at this point, 40 countries. And definitely, it's been a great experience to be able to see through the life of the school so far since its inception to this level of maturity. And definitely as I lead the online education in K-12 world, it's been definitely fun to be able to advise CGA, again from its inception to the current state. So I've been part of the advisory board, as you know, for CGA. Also, I've been definitely doing various kinds of educational / business activities, like giving lectures for students, teachers, and students' parents, and also publishing books on various kinds of topics. And that has been definitely helping me do great things in Japan.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really, I think everyone at CGA knows about who you are, and they've always wanted to know more, so I think that gives an introduction. And yes, so when questions regarding the benefits of online education for students come up, I think I've noticed that a lot of them feel pretty short term, such as no transportation time or there's time saved every day. But I think a lot of us online students want to know more about what the long-term benefits are. So could you tell us a little bit more about some of the long-term benefits that you've observed of online education?
Yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful question. Definitely, as you say, I think there are some benefits that could be achieved in different ways, right? Like this time-saving things, like without transportation and such, that could be achieved by other kinds of methods, right? You can kind of try to be effective on time in other ways than online education. But then there are certain things, I believe, that are pretty unique to online education, and I definitely can point to those. I think one big one that I often mention is this true global classroom experience, so to speak, right? Because you can be by talking to students in class online, you guys can be in different places, right? From all over the world, and maybe you might be talking about some specific news of the day, but different countries may broadcast those kinds of news in very different ways, right? And etc. So you can share these living experience in those different parts of the world with students in the class. That's the kind of experience that you wouldn't be able to get in an in-person environment, right? Because you've got to be really living pretty close, right, to each other. So I really didn't realize that benefit before I started this online high school, but I think that's one of the biggest benefit, being able to talk to people who are currently living in different places, and that's a wonderful and important experience for students.
I really like that answer, especially because I felt that way when COVID occurred, and all countries were at very different places with COVID. So it was really interesting being like, oh, we got vaccinated, and then knowing where Japan is with vaccinations, or being like, oh, we have one more COVID case today, so now we're all in lockdown, which seems, I think, for a lot of us Australian students or Japanese students or whatever, it was really eye-opening to see that different governments were handling things differently and how it was affecting students our age.
Yeah, definitely, right? Yeah. For for instance, right, like in the US, there's been this BLM, like, right, Black Lives Matter movement. And most of, let's say, like as we are in Japan right now, right, people in Japan might have heard of the news, right, and so forth. But if you actually hear from your fellow classmate, right, in a class, right, oh, this is what's going on in my city in the US, that's gonna have a very different impact on you, right, rather than just seeing this tasteless news, right, from TV and so forth. So I think that's a very big thing. And other things, if I may go for other ones, I definitely think that this kind of flexibility, right? Like, well, that's definitely related to this time-saving aspects of the benefits of online education, as you mentioned. But as you do, right, like students can be engaged in different kinds of activities and different kind of projects while they experience really great kind of education that CGA, for instance, offers. So that's something that may not be as available to those in-person school experience. So yeah, definitely like this kind of a great level of flexibility given to students is a big benefit, I think.
Yep, thank you. Especially with like students who do like sports, I have several like classmates who do like sports pretty competitively, and they've talked about how online education has allowed them to not have to choose between their like sports and their school. So that's been really interesting to see.
Yeah. And for some students, right, like maybe competitive athletes, right, they might not be able to actually live in one place in the, because they have to be competing, right, in this country this time and in that country next time, right? So then like they may not be able to actually get any good education, right, if they actually try to focus on their competitive athletics experience. But with online education, they can still learn, and even from a great school like CGA. And so that's definitely a unique benefit of online education, I think.
Yep. And next, I wanted to hear more about COVID-19 and how you think that impacted how the world views online education. Because COVID-19 really made me gave me the push to start attending an online high school. And I was wondering, do you think that those effects are permanent, and what do you think those effects are?
So like as is often said for other things, I think that the pandemic really didn't change what was going to happen for online education, but it simply kind of accelerated the pace of the growth of online education, I think. So prior to the pandemic, for instance, like 2019, like 3% of the world's entire education market had been on online education. So it's about like 200 to 300 billion US dollars, for instance, right? But then that had been already projected to become 1 trillion in 15 years, right? So it's about 2034, right? More than 10% of education in the world was gonna be online education, right? But then after the pandemic, what happened. This projection, 15-year projection, is now shortened into half, and so that kind of illustrates people were anyway kind of expecting the rapid growth of online education, but it simply happened very quickly because of the pandemic. But then your question still is a really great one, I think, because definitely a lot of people suddenly had to experience online education, whether they liked it or not. Right? I hope you do like it, but and other CGA students. But so that, I think, definitely created lots of interesting situation, because some students might have liked the kind of online education that they got. They are lucky ones, right? But I definitely have seen and heard some voices, saying, "Oh, this is so terrible," and when can I really be back, in person, etc., with the school? And so it's so much mixed, right? So some people really said, "Oh yeah, online education, I had heard of it, and it's really great." But some others, I had heard of it, and it's really bad. I don't want to do that again, right? So as we run online school at CGA and online high school at Stanford, like it's been a really interesting time because how would the education market respond to this, as you say? And at this moment, we still see some steady growth. Like in some countries, the pandemic situation is definitely improving, and like reopening is happening pretty rapidly in some countries, and even in those countries, I think still online enrollment is increasing. So I think it's gonna still continue for a while, but I think there's gotta be some sort of like a plateau, right? It's still on this kind of high growth time right now, but then probably around, I would bet, a third, like when online education becomes a third of the entire world education market, I think it's gonna be the balance. There's always gonna be lots of people who wanna do in-person education,
right?
And then there is always gonna be people who want to do online, and the kind of ratio that I'm kind of predicting nowadays is 1 to 2.
Yep. It's been really interesting to see as like COVID starts calming down, because I've noticed that some of my friends who were really like, oh, I want to go back to school, like I want to go to like normal school, like I hate online school, or now that things look like that we're gonna actually start going to like school physically again, they're like, oh, I have to like make more time in the morning to like go to school and things like that. So I think everyone's been adjusting to the change like in so many different ways. So that's been really cool to see.
Yeah, definitely, right? My son, like my older son is 7 years old, and he definitely at the beginning, I think he was struggling a little bit, like when he had to do the online first grade, right? This year in the US, but then at the end he really loved it, like, because it's really easy, right?
Yeah.
And in some ways, so he was like, at the beginning, like when his school reopened, like he said, oh, why should I go to school when I can do this like online thing? And now I think like he likes to be back definitely in school, but yeah, like younger people definitely adapt so quickly and effectively, and because I was pretty skeptical about. I have been, and maybe I'm still a little bit skeptical about the effectiveness of online education for really young kids,
Yes,
right?
yep.
But it somehow worked for my kids. So like, so I had to kind of change my mind a little bit there. But yeah, definitely I'm, during the pandemic, even though I had been doing online education for such a long time, there are definitely lots of like findings and learning out of it.
Yeah, that I was actually remember I had a parent ask me whether I recommend online school to her daughter, and I just thought like she was pretty young, like around 7 or so, and I just thought, well, if I was 7 years old, I wonder how this would have worked for me. But yeah, I'm curious to know how it's working for really young students, especially when like a huge part of education is not about like going to class and taking your A-level subjects, but interacting with other students. So yeah, I'm really excited to see the effects of like this time on like students who are really young now in the future. And now moving on to clubs at Stanford Online High School. When I was looking through the site, I saw that there was like a huge range of clubs. Some of the ones that really caught my attention was the Gender and Sexuality Alliance, the OHS Observer, which is like the student newspaper.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And one called How to Start a Business. And I was wondering, how are the clubs at Stanford Online High School structured? And do you have any tips for online high school students who want to participate more in these clubs?
Yeah, those are really great questions. So the way it works in Stanford Online High School for clubs is students, when they want to do some clubs, they need to make a pretty solid proposal.
Yeah.
The purpose of the club, activities, and the kind of year-long schedule, when to meet, right? And then those proposals are gonna be evaluated, and we only select, I think right now, like 60 clubs. And then there are normally more than 60 proposals submitted, so it's kind of a selective process. So students need to really plan the clubs well, and that's kind of a key ingredient there, right? Because for online activities, like, sometimes it's less motivating than in person, right? So, but then by engaging students very early, right? Like, oh, my club need to be like selected, right, to become a club. So they really, plan the schedules and activities pretty well. And of course, like even with that, right, some clubs don't really fly very well, but I think that's a necessary process, like kind of letting them make a good plan and then even like give some advice, right? Like this part needs to be this way, kind of. Yeah. So even before the club is formed, we give pretty comprehensive advice to our students. So in terms of tips for students, right, for online clubs, definitely like this kind of planning ahead, which is always a good thing to be doing anyways, right? I think it's really a key, like, because, right, like it's an online club, in some cases students might say, oh yeah, this time I gotta do this other thing, and right? But if you actually have already a year-long schedule, right, at least students can try to be committed to the schedule, etc., etc. So that's one. Another thing would be, this is also kind of my general advice for online engagement in online activities, kind of having a chat group going, right? Like, so if there is a club, like let's say GSA, I think has a pretty active text chat community going. So they meet and discuss things online, synchronously at some point, but they also communicate simply throughout the week. Outside of their actual meetings, right? I think that gives this kind of sense of, oh yeah, my fellow club mates are, right, like they are, and then we are talking about the same things, and then kind of even, I would recommend to set the role for someone, right? So, oh, this is like, so you are chat leader today, so say something about this topic. If it's a gender kind of issue, like, throw one question, right, for that day, and then tomorrow it's you kind of thing, right? Then kind of try to kind of, have a very active chat, and sometimes it doesn't fly that way, but you can still though, like try some of those techniques, I think, yeah.
I think this has been an ongoing, I wouldn't say debate, but it's been an ongoing discussion among CGA students and teachers and staff. How much teacher involvement is there in these clubs at Stanford Online High School? Because I know that at CGA, some students are like, I want this to be mainly student-led, like no teachers at all. And some students are like, I think we really need like teacher leadership and guidance.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, actually, I forgot to include that piece, right? Like, so every every club proposals need to come with teacher sponsorship. So the kind of part of the process of proposing a club is actually for the student leaders to talk to the teacher that they want to be working with. And then kind of the level of engagement from the side of teacher differs, but then that's kind of, right, the student leaders of a club might need to kind of negotiate kind of at the beginning, right, like when they are trying to make a proposal. So, so for instance, like observers, right, like you are, right, this journal club at Stanford Online High School, that I think one has pretty good, like high level of teacher engagement. I think our writing center director is the school, a kind of club sponsor for Observer, and yeah, but that's really kind of a high engagement kind of club. But then there are some, like, for instance, I was a club sponsor for a cooking club at some point. I was like basically watching what students are doing in terms of online cooking. Like, I'm gonna bake this today, or like the student show thing. But I didn't say anything, right? I was just present in the meeting, and so really low engagement kind of thing. So it just differs, but I think it just depends on the purpose and then the way that the club leaders want the club to be.
Okay. Yep, I think that would be useful advice for a lot of us who are running clubs right now to, reach out to teachers and see if they can help guide us in these clubs. And I guess this leads me to my next question, which I suppose the student government is less of a club. But we wanted to know, I know that Stanford Online High School also has a student government, and the student board for CGA was recently announced. What does the student government at Stanford Online High School do?
Right. That's a great question. I think our, student government, look, the role of it is differently, it just depends on schools. So you can, students can kind of define the role of the student government in the way that they think is good for the school, generally speaking. But that said, there are some regular things that the student government does, which Stanford Online High School student government does as well. So for instance, like holding regular assembly, right? Like I think our student government holds a regular assembly, like a monthly one, I think. So like they talk about like how to the project that they want to be doing. Like they, for instance, did, let's see, like a few years ago, they indeed wanted to have a chat room going for each class. Previously it's been like, students had to ask teachers to create one, and it wasn't an automatic process, but they thought that this text chat room for each class was so important, so they student government actually run that project to work with our tech department to auto-generate these like Slack, some text chat room going, etc. So like they talk about those things, and then they also wanted to make, I think recently, student government constitution, I think, right? So they discussed those and then made their own rules and etc. And also, right, in student assemblies, they might talk about event organization, right? Like, let's say Halloween, for October student assembly, they might do like a Halloween assembly, and then they talk about what kind of programs they may have and all those kinds of things. Yeah, so monthly meetings and some seasonal event planning. And also, I'd recommend, if you guys are interested, right, like some sort of like, I think student government can, they do represent the student body, right? So maybe you guys can, maybe like, I don't know if CGA teachers and administration likes the idea, but some schools do like have student government members in school leadership discussion, right? Because like for school operations and projects, like school need to understand what students need and all that, right? So I think that's a good thing if that can be achieved. So in some cases, student government indeed has some impact on the school decisions. So yeah.
That sounds so interesting. I have to ask
right,
and see if I can do that at one point.
Yeah.
That was really eye-opening. I know you mentioned events at some point. Could you list the several events that Stanford Online High School has, like the Halloween ones?
Oh, like particularly the ones that the student government, right? Well, yeah. So Halloween one, and let's see. Oh, they do, I think, also run right, like this kind of a. Oh, this week is this special week, and Monday you should wear this like a pajama day, and then Tuesday.
Spirit Week?
Yeah, Spirit Week, right? Like they organize Spirit Week differently, I think, once a semester, I think. And then they do also, I think it depends on the year, but they also often do, what's the name of this thing? Like, so-and-so is the Mr. Smart, like whatever, right? Like.
Yeah. No, I think I know what you're talking about.
Right. Like, So, Mr. Smart, and then so-and-so is, Mr. Fashionable, or whatever, right? They do these kind of fun kind of things. Oh, and then we do have in-person events, right, at Stanford. Well, right now, pandemic, but, normally we would, and then we would let students have some plans for some parts of the in-person events. Oh, they also do, like, alumni event as well. They invite some of the alums and try to get advice, right? Like, oh, what's been your experience at your college, and I'm thinking about going there, kind of, yeah.
That seems really cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to see more of those events happening at CGA one day. And yeah, I'm wondering, I know you mentioned like in-person events and like meetups, and I think a lot of the students in Auckland have been meeting up for CGA. I'm wondering, outside of like students who can meet in like Palo Alto at Stanford and around that area, do students in other regions meet together?
Yes, they do. I think, so what was the number the other day, like some of the parent association members were telling me like the number of regions we have in, I mean, I think I should know this probably, but it's like so many, right? Because we cover different parts of the world. I think it's like even about like 30 regions in the world. In the US, I think, as we have more people there, I think we have even about 20 regions, I think. And the way that it works in our school is differently. I think students have some roles, but this one is more like run by parents. And then they don't necessarily like form regions on their own, but it's more of OHS Parent Association somehow defining regions, and then kind of like get a volunteer to be a regional leader. And so there's a little bit of a structure there. Yeah.
That's cool to hear. I hope I can see some of my friends one day in person in Japan, and I think we're sort of trying to find a time to meet up in Tokyo right now.
Oh
so
yeah,
I
that'd
hope
be
it
so
happens
fun.
soon.
Yeah. If I'm in Tokyo, yeah, please invite me.
Oh, yeah. It's currently summer break for me and winter break for a lot of the students in New Zealand and Australia. And so we have 3 weeks off. Do you have any recommendations for things that we can do during this break time?
Yeah, I definitely would recommend you guys to do what you might not be able to do during, right, school time, right? So if your region is reopening, I definitely would recommend you to go outside and do like experience stuff that you don't normally experience. So studying is always good, and if the kind of experience you want during the summer is learning, that's fine too. But if you were to choose, I'd recommend you to focus on the kind of things that you don't do differently, right?
Right.
Maybe this is not a very surprising like kind of advice, but I think this kind of doing a different thing is definitely important, because in some cases, right, like students might choose to do the kind of thing that they do during the regular school time, right? Like, oh, I'm kind of fine with math, but during the summer I want to be better at math, and then there's nothing wrong about that. But that's the kind of thing that you anyway do during the school year, right? If you were to choose between that kind of thing and then the kind of, oh yeah, even for learning, like my school doesn't teach this leadership thing, so I want to kind of do this leadership camp thing, right, during the summer. And that's the kind of thing that I would recommend you guys to think about, something different.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be useful advice for a lot of people reading this today.
Yeah, so nice, right? Like, was it a good advice? Like,
yeah.
I think that was a little.
I don't think I've ever heard it phrased in this way ever before.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think now I want to move on to the 3 questions by CGA students, other than myself. And so the first one is from Taro, and he's a CGA student from Nagasaki.
Wow.
And he actually said that he read your book before, and he's really inspired by you. He wants to be an educator one day, so he admires you. And yeah, he was really excited to hear that you'll be interviewed for the CGA Press, and he wanted to ask, you wrote about philosophy classes in Stanford Online High School. In the book, you mentioned what students learn in the classes. I want to know more about how they are learning, because I feel that it is difficult to learn philosophy as a high school student.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And Tara, thank you so much for reading my book. And let me know his address, and we can send another one and such. But so philosophy, definitely like. Philosophy has been traditionally a topic that's introduced to students at college, right? Like in many countries. And there is a reason for that, right? Because that's tough for younger students in various ways. I think one advice that I've been giving to students and also to schools, which might try to introduce philosophy curriculum, is to definitely start with some concrete topics. So for instance, in Stanford Online High School, the first philosophy class for high school, 9th grade philosophy course, is based on statistics and biology, right? So that's something that you guys are pretty very much familiar with, and numbers and I don't know, like animals, plants, right? Like pretty tangible things. And then students even do some experiments and such. But then in doing experiments and analysis, like they come across some sort of philosophical issues, right? Like, when you do an experiment and then get some data points, right? You know what the data points should look like, right? Maybe like this linear kind of, right? But then always, right, there is this kind of a disagreement between, right, the data and the graph or whatever you might need. And then is it the fit between what's expected by a theory and data sets, or is it a disagreement, right? And then some disagreements are called agreement, and then some disagreements are called disagreements. What's the difference? Right? Yeah. So I just illustrated the kind of, you start from these tangible examples or material to kind of try to extract some philosophical insights. So if we try to start with very abstract like concepts by like famous philosopher Kant or something, right? That's gonna be really tough. But just start with some tangible examples, or try to find books that might start with those tangible examples.
That's super cool. I'd done some biology before, but I don't think I've ever considered philosophy in those contexts. So I think next time maybe I'll think about philosophy when I do these other subjects.
Oh yeah, actually, biology is a particularly wonderful scientific subject to do philosophy, right? Like, even like a definition of life, right? Or an animal, and then we have a pretty good natural understanding of the concept like animal or life. But when you actually study biology, like that kind of expectation is definitely pretty quickly broken down, right? In the natural world, like you see this kind of animal which is more like an insect, for a part of the life, but then it becomes like a plant at some point, and then right. So what is animals and what are plants? Like that's an even tough question in biology. And there's this area called philosophy of biology, which is really interesting. But anyhow, yeah, they're kind of starting with some. I'd recommend even like science. Like start with science and try to do some, find some philosophical elements in there. Yeah.
This reminds me. Do you have any subjects or genres that you would recommend all students to study?
In high school, Well, yes, again, I do believe in the value of philosophy in an earlier age than college. So definitely philosophy is a thing that I recommend.
Okay. And the next question is from Karen, and she's an Australian student who is actually the director of the opinions column at the CGA Press. And she's also part of the student board, and I've gotten closer to her as I've worked on these projects, and she's really great. And she wanted to know what your motivation was throughout all of this.
Oh, yeah, thank you. That's a wonderful question, Karen. You mean and probably Karen might mean so I do this, school head thing and then advising, right, Crimson, and then do these write books and such, right? Right, is that the correct? Yeah. No, I actually think that having these different types of things in different world actually helps me a lot to stay motivated, right? Because I fail so many times, right? Always there's mistake and error and failure and all that, right? And then get discouraged maybe. But that doesn't happen to all these, let's say US activities, CGA, and then Japan, right?
Right.
Maybe I have some bad day for US, but then that doesn't necessarily happen for New Zealand kind of activity or Japan, right? So I can get encouraged by those activities and then try to get some energy to be back on the US things, and then I think there are other situations where, oh, maybe like, you know, Japan thing isn't going very well, but like you get encouragement from other ones. So like, I often recommend people to have, and particularly students, right, to have, you know, to belong to different kinds of communities, right? Intentionally kind of create opportunity to belong to different kind of communities and kind of different kind of projects, different kind of, right? Then again, like, you know, if you have 5 communities going, right, you know, I don't think, you know, it's very likely that you have bad days for all of those, right? So I think that's definitely something that's helping me.
That's super interesting. Maybe us students can be like, oh, we could have done better on this test, but we still have these extracurriculars that are super fun and exciting that we didn't have a bad day for.
Exactly, and they actually, right, like, there's this thing called like social psychological theory called self-affirmation theory, and proposed by one of the Stanford social psychologists, Claude Steele. He actually says, like what I was saying, like what you were saying, right? Like maybe you get discouraged in one area, but you know, encouraged by others, right? And then study those like psychological effects. One interesting thing is, right, like, oh, no, don't do that, right? Like, if you have an issue, you need to, you know, face the issue and confront it and then kind of overcome it, right?
Right.
You know, it's like escaping, right, from the issue, like, yeah, you go there and then, right? But actually, you know, this kind of a self-affirmation theory literature actually has pretty well established the kind of idea that you shouldn't actually do this thing. So like, if you have an issue, don't try to work on that, because you get actually even more discouraged. Right. So this is even like scientifically supported idea. Like, you know, have more communities and then kind of get encouragement from other ones than the one that you are having an issue with.
That's really helpful advice. I think I'd do that when I'll struggle with like another subject, and I'll look at another topic that I can look towards.
Yeah, that's a good thing, is like, right?
Yeah.
Like normally, like, you know, you might be told like, oh, that's not a good thing.
That's procrastinating.
Right. But that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. And last but not least, Rhea, who is also Australian, and she's also a reporter for the CGA Press, asks, how do you think online learning impacts social interaction? And how do you envision pupils developing emotionally as well as intellectually in an online setting?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question, Leo. So I do believe that, like, you know, there are ways for us to be, you know, adapting to have more social interactions, right? And then I do believe online education can support students' social emotional development. But I do also believe that people need, you know, regular human interactions as well, right? In-person ones. So it's more about the question isn't like 1 or 0, right? Online or, right, no online, in-person or, right, like no online. But the question is more of what the best mix might be, right, of kind of in-person elements and online elements. So that said, though, I think for the online environment like CGA, Stanford Online High School as well, I think one key idea that I've been submitting is that the kind of importance of class time, right? In a regular, I think, right, in-person school environment, right, kind of social interaction is like meant to be happening outside of class, right? Like, you know, classes to study and then, right, but then outside of it, like you make friendship and all that, right? And then these nice events and fun, and you kind of make friends out of those experiences, and then kind of that's a good thing for your learning in class, right? But it's almost like, to me, like in this online environment, it's flipped, because if you try to do these like clubs or events or like these things online, like, you know, nothing really works well unless you actually have already good relationships going, right? So I think, but then like in an in-person environment, like these events and such work even without like pre-established friendship and such, right? So I think in an online environment, like classes are the key because everybody need to come, right? And then interact and all that. So on the side of teachers, they need to differently appreciate that aspect and then kind of have more interactive, right? And then kind of see this importance of supporting students socially, emotionally during the class, right? And then also students need to appreciate that fact as well too, to take advantage of the opportunity of interaction in classes. So that's kind of one advice. And then another one, like which I've already kind of mentioned earlier in this conversation, was kind of using this regular text chat, kind of like feeling that somebody is still there, right? Like, because in this online environment, you don't see your friend's face all the time, or
right.
etc. So I think text chat helps definitely. Yeah.
One thing I've noticed is that in an online environment, I have to like go out of my way to reach out to people, to get to know new people, because I don't bump into people while going to class and go, hey, who are you? Like, how are you? And things like that. I'm wondering, and like, how, like, does Stanford Online High School try to like mimic those sort of like natural conversations, or does it encourage like more like reaching out and things like that, or is there like some other way these sort of natural interactions occur?
Oh yeah. So I think one thing that I know some of our, or I think many of our students do is, I mean, they do what we've been talking about, but also I know they keep some video conferencing software on for the entire day, right? Like, let's say if it's Zoom, right? You turn it on for the day and your friends are all there. Even when you go to, let's say, like a bathroom, right? Of course, you don't take the computer, that's gonna be an issue, right? But then the computer is gonna stay on your desk, so it's gonna be empty, your seat is empty, but your friend sees it, right? Oh yeah, you go somewhere, like maybe having lunch or something. But, you know, kind of let it, stay on. Then kind of you guys might study, like you come back to the seat and others are there, and you guys don't even talk, but you start working on things. But still, right, there's this kind of a sense of presence of somebody else. And then if you want to talk to Leo in that texture, like you can talk to, right, etc. So many students seem to do that. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go and dinner and then come back in 30 minutes or something, right?
That's really cool, because then at that point it's not intentional. You don't have a purpose of having that conversation, but it's like if something does come up, you can talk.
Exactly.
Wow, I think I might do that one day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to circle back to all of this, I just want to ask lastly, do you have any advice for readers of the CGA Press in general about like life or education or school, just about anything?
Yeah. So I think that kind of one important general message that we have been coming down to in this conversation is this, like, online education definitely gives you a great opportunity, but you definitely need to try actively to get one from your end, right? So this kind of socialization in an online environment is a big topic, but then maybe in a regular school in-person environment, like whether you like it or not, like you go to the classroom and then you have some people around you, right?
Right.
So whether you like it or not, like you anyway need to talk to someone or be talked to, right, by somebody, right? But then in the online environment, there's nothing like that, right? Like you need to be very actively reaching out. And so I definitely have been saying, like, you need to be even more social in an online environment than the regular one. So yeah, so you need to be definitely, actively engaging yourself in things, and then that's going to be a really great skill that you would need anyways for your future journeys, like after online education. So yeah, so be active and try to engage.
That's great advice. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I think we all found your advice and your insights on everything to be really useful. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.